this winter. One group that definitely did suffer was students. So when we hear that no less than £470 million of government funding is going to be made available to universities and colleges across England, well, one's ears prick up. Here with the details of exactly how and where this money is to be spent is the relevant Government Secretary of State. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan joins me now. Good to have you on, the Secretary of State. Thank you. Who does the money go to and where? Good morning to you.
It goes to universities, about 100 of them, and they've all basically applied for the different things, but the latest and greatest equipment to help with technical skills training. So that's everything from midwifery, podiatry, 3D metal printing for bespoke manufactured parts, advanced manufacturing. There's a whole host of universities all around the country that have applied for this funding. And yeah, this is the announcement today, so they'll all be delighted. And yeah, it's really investing in skills and training the next generation and people who want to go back into a second career, but enable them to access the latest and greatest in equipment to get that training.
And how do you and your colleagues, how do you ascertain whether a course or a subject is worth the additional funding? What are the criteria you exercise?
Well, we look for those things that, you know, are future facing, those things that, you know, we have shortages of. There's a lot of different various skills and those that need the latest equipment. So, yeah, I mean, for example, one of them we have it's a mocked up residential care home training the next generation of people to look after the elderly, and podiatry and all kinds of skills will be trained in those facilities.
All right, if I can lead you into a couple of other areas, and one that I'm sure will concern you as Education Secretary. You'll be aware of the problem of strep, indeed the fatal problem of strep that's got this country. The last time I looked, 9 young people have lost their lives. Your colleague, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, said there are enough drugs in this country currently to deal with that, and yet we're hearing from the Pharmaceutical Association that there are not enough drugs. Secretary of State, who's got this right?
Well, I mean, I'm being told the same as the Health Secretary, that there are enough by the NHS, that there are enough nationally. I would imagine what's happening is, you know, you might be getting surges in demand in some areas. I mean, obviously, parents are very concerned, and, you know, we urge parents to be vigilant and look out for the symptoms of strep A, which are sore throat, fever, headache, a rash, a mild rash, etc. So that's what we're urging parents to do. But there is no national shortage, and we're also working, or the NHS are working on making sure that they have more supply lines as well.
Would you consider supplying them direct to primary schools?
Well, we haven't looked at that. Usually, you know, to set up these things logistically, it's best normally to use the existing processes. It's not very quick to set these things up, so probably it would be better to use the existing processes.
Now, The Guardian today reports that the schools bill introduced this year with a promise to, quote, raise education standards across England has been scrapped. Apparently, in your first appearance as Education Secretary before the relevant committee, you made this announcement. Might I ask you, originally, what was the schools bill meant to do, and why has this decision been taken?
Well, there was a number of things in the school's white paper which we are still getting on with. But there was a couple of things in the bill specifically around registration of children who are not in school. There was something around structures around multi-academy trusts. There was something around structures around faith schools as well. So there was a number of things in the bill, and effectively, you know, the legislative programme, it was started, but that's been knocked off course. We are going to try and do some of those things that we need to do specifically if we can, but most of it didn't need legislation. So the vast majority of the focus of the school's white paper is really about excellence, about standards, about targets, about training, more training for teachers, more continuous professional development for teachers, more training for heads. So there's a lot of investment going into our schools, both in buildings, in energy efficiency, in training, and of course in funding as well.
Now, I'm a little bit confused, Secretary of State, because one of your predecessors, Nadim Zahawi, said that this was going to be a government priority, and now it's been binned.
No, it's a priority. Well, it's a priority to do all the things in the white paper. Very little of it did need. Well, that's the legislation bit. So you've got the white paper, which has basically got all the targets that we're aiming to do, all the training we're aiming to introduce and roll out. So that's all still going ahead, but you don't need legislation for that. The legislation was specifically around, those structures, etc. And we're still going to try and do prioritise one or two of those areas, but the rest of it we've we've run out of legislative time. But to be honest, I still think we can do most of what was in the white paper without the legislation.
Do you think some of our schools, possibly even some of our teachers, are too woke, Secretary of State?
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't have that view. I mean, all the teachers I speak to are hugely dedicated, hugely innovative as well, and very much, very pastoral as well in their care for our children, helping them to catch up after the awful pandemic that they've suffered.
Again, I refer to the newspapers. You said that we need a big dose of transparency, your words, not mine, in schools, of fears of a creeping political bias. You said the vast majority of teachers treat commitments to neutrality extremely carefully, but some public institutions, again your words, have lost their way a little bit. What does that mean?
Well, the actual discussion was at the Education Select Committee, and there was a number of things. They were talking about critical race theory in schools. They were talking about how the religious and health and sex education, and some aspects of transgender, how they were, whether that was age appropriate. So there was a discussion around that, which is why we are actually putting out some guidance, which will be coming out in the new year around transgender and how to treat that very difficult, tricky subject, but how to help teachers, to support teachers to teach that. That's what the actual discussion was about. And there was a number of stories about parents asking what were their children being taught in school, and what we've said is, that they should, parents should be able to see what their children are being taught in school. And there was a question mark about whether you could share materials because of copyright, and we just wanted to clear that up, that yes, you can in person show those materials to parents if they want to see. If their young child comes home asking questions and they're a bit concerned, they should be able to have that conversation with the school.
I understand there was quite a conversation about whether white privilege should be taught. Should it?
Well, that was part of it, and critical race theory. There was a number of things that were being discussed.
Should white privilege be taught?
Well, no, we've basically said, look, here's what we should be teaching. We should have balanced and debate. There is a lot of debate in the country. We should be able to have those debates. We should be able to have those open discussions. But you shouldn't be teaching things as fact that are debates. So that was a part of the push.
So white privilege isn't fact?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a fact. I mean, I don't, for me, think that there's a privilege to being white on its own, no.
And I note earlier guidance talked about this balanced manner that you've mentioned, particularly historical matters such as the British Empire and the Israel-Palestine, which says here, although there is no such country, Israel-Palestine conflict. How do you bring balance to the teaching of the Israel-Palestine conflict, Secretary of State?
Oh, well, I don't know. I'm not a teacher who is responsible
no, but you are
for this.
the Secretary of State for Education.
The message here, Nick, is to make sure that where there is differences of opinion, that is what is discussed. And those differences of opinion, which, come from different parts of those conflicts, if there are conflicts, or debates, if there are differences of opinion, that there's an open discussion about those, and not to be teaching as fact one part of a debate.
Okay, let's try this then. You're the teacher.
So it's a balance.
You're the teacher, Miss. Who's caused the problems between Israel and Palestine? How would you respond?
Well, I wouldn't respond. That's not a simple,
But I've just raised my hand, and Miss, who's to blame, Miss?
Well, again, it's not a simple yes or no. It's a complex discussion about Israel and Palestine. There's a lot of discussion on both sides, and there's been a lot of harms done on both sides as well. I think we know this is a very difficult, ongoing discussion and conflict around about lands and settlement. And I think, you would have to teach the history as it was, but the conflict as it is now, because there are different sides of that debate.
Last couple of questions. I don't need to tell you we are looking sadly at a winter of considerable industrial unrest. It is also reported the Prime Minister is keen to explore some kind of legislation to provide for emergency services such as firefighters, ambulance staff. Would you support such a move? And if so, why, Secretary of State?
Well, yes. I mean, I think, we do have some areas where, strikes are not allowed as part of the contract. So, for example, the military can't go on strike, and the police. There's some people, as a matter of public safety, you can't go on strike. And I think what we're looking at is are there other areas that we should include in that? Health would be one to look at, and other areas of critical infrastructure.
Would teachers be added to that list?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at that. I mean, obviously teachers are balloting at the moment. I'm hopeful. The unions requested additional funding for schools, £2 billion per year for the next 2 years. We were very lucky to get that in the autumn statement, despite the economic challenges from the war in Ukraine and the overhang from the pandemic. We did get that extra funding, which is exactly what they were asking for. They have a pay rise which has been accepted in line with the independent recommendations of between 5 and 8.9%. So I'm hoping that teachers, everybody knows that our children, their education's been disrupted. So I'm hoping that teachers don't go on strike. But, it's clear that there are some parts of our economy that we need, the impact on everybody else is massive if people go on strike. And of course, it's really disappointing that we hear that Border Force are going on strike and going to disrupt a lot of people's Christmas.
Lastly, you and all your colleagues talk about fiscal responsibility and how you must maintain that. But this comes at a time when one Conservative peer in the House of Lords would appear to have benefited to the tune of tens of millions of pounds from what can easily be described as dodgy, if not potentially downright corrupt contracts. I speak, of course, of Michelle Mone. Why should my listeners have any faith in your fiscal policies when someone like that seems to be able to, reportedly, trouser so much cash?
Well, I mean, that is the investigation that's going on, and we'll obviously look forward to seeing what happens there. I mean, if as reported, clearly, we need to make sure we get to the bottom of what happened there. I mean, obviously, during the pandemic, there were times, and you will have been discussing these on your programme, where the biggest concern, the number one thing, was to get PPE to the front line to protect those nurses and doctors who were helping people who were very ill with COVID right at the beginning. So, of course, that was the government's priority. The government's priority was to do that in a quick way. By the way, ministers get nowhere near any procurement. So, any suggestion that a minister would have been involved is not only disrespectful to the minister, but also to the. I know you didn't, but it's sometimes said.
But should Baroness Mone be suspended from the party?
Well, my understanding is that she has now. She's now sort of taken a break, a leave of absence, so therefore no longer has the whip. But of course, it is a live investigation. But once the investigation is concluded, then the appropriate action will be taken, and swiftly, I'm sure.
Grateful for your time as ever. Thank you. 1 minute after 8, we finish with Gillian Keegan, Education Secretary.